Hello, hello. I'm here today in something a little bit different from our usual broadcast. We're in the Tier 6 reward premium, the Prinz Eitel Friedrich. This is a German battleship at Tier 6 that was given out to us as the final reward for the Christmas campaign last year. Now, she's always been a bit of a maligned ship. She's suffered from being, well, German and a battleship, and having rather poor shell characteristics, so she's never quite shined. In addition, she was designed in the pre-carrier rework era as an AA ship, but then of course the rework happened, and neutered skills which are very important to her, such as advanced firing training and manual fire control for AA armaments. And so as a result, she ended up being a bit of a ship without an identity, because she originally was best known as an AA platform. However, the Prinz Eitel, being a Mackensen-class battlecruiser of World War I origin, appears in the game as a bit of a modernized Mackensen. As you can see here, she mixes some World War I and World War II features. She has that very World War I era casemate, but then she has those modern World War II 105mm secondaries, and she has a somewhat modernized superstructure. But anyhow, the reason why I'm revisiting the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, all gaffes aside about her crappy 350mm guns, which have very, very poor penetration due to the qualities and characteristics of the shell they fire, is because of the changes to all German battleships on the most recent patch. Now, recently, the German battleships went from having German dispersion to having American/British dispersion. And what this means is that you went from having a very wide oblong ellipse, very similar to the Soviet ellipse, to a more circular ellipse of the Americans. This is significant to the Prinz Eitel, of course, because she's always actually had quite an excellent sigma value of 2.0. So with 8 barrels and 2.0 sigma and an American dispersion formula, this gives her practically identical statistics to the North Carolina at Tier 8, albeit with 1 barrel less and with a heck of a lot less penetration power, but I just wanted to revisit her and check out and see if her dispersion has gotten markedly better. So starting off, firing our first volley of the game, finally something closes into range. Nice tight cluster. Looks like they're under lead, however. I'm gonna re-angle my Prinz Eitel armor for the Grush Bay. As I take fire from Ismail, he's firing armor, or high explosive rather than armor piercing, so it seems I angled needlessly. You can see here the forward angles are good, but not great. He's slightly angled, so with my low penetration shells, see what we can do. Pretty tight cluster so far again, but not much there in terms of actual damage. Now the Prinz Eitel is fairly unique amongst Germans in terms of battleships, in addition because she also has a rather poorly protected citadel. Now that's not to say it's completely unarmored and she has cruiser levels of armament. It is actually fine. Her belt is fairly substantial, but she is missing the turtleback that you do find in most of the other designs of German battleships in this game. So as a result, her citadel is actually quite accessible. Nothing too impressive so far in terms of damage, but the dispersion salvos have looked quite a bit cleaner than they used to in the past. Von Klin pops up, which is perfect. This is a target I want to use AP on anyway. French destroyer lands 6 of my shells at close range. Very nice, obviously. He's going to angle against me, but remember I still have those relatively high caliber 350mm shells, which means I overmatch most of his pathetic little destroyer armor anyhow. Pushing up toward the Graf Bay, but remember the Graf Bay has torpedoes. Chargeverse is a bit sluggish. In testing it was quite rapid, but that did unfortunately eat a nerf. You can see here, the Prinz Eitel lacks any kind of spotting consumable. No planes, no hydro, no nothing. So going around the corner, we are rather blind. Crash Bay appears. Remember, the Crash Bay has those rear-mounted torpedo tubes, the quads. At this range, they'd be almost impossible to dodge. So I do have to do this very carefully. He's reversing out. At this close range, I am able to citadel him quite nicely. Gonna beat those torpedoes. Hopefully my allies finish him off so I don't have to shoot him myself after. Very nice. Now the Prinz Eitel is a very long ship for tier 6. It's kind of hard to tell without a point of comparison, but she is rather large for a mid-tier battleship. Now probably in fact longer than that Colorado that I'm shooting at if we were to compare, or if we were to go side to side. Gonna wait for my reload, fire one more salvo into this relatively broadside Nelson. Now the Nelson's fairly thinly armored, but remember, the Prinz Eitel, one of her key problems is that she has poor penetration. However, let's see if we can at least land our 8 shells. She's moving very slowly. Slightly angled, however, so I'll aim for upper casemate. See how consistent these salvos are. 1, 2 from the first front guns. So we land about half at 11 kilometers, which is not fantastic. Now I'm reticent to push into the 2 tier 7s here because, well, 1, they overmatch me, and 2, the Nelson has very powerful, high explosive. And while I still do have that distributed German armor scheme, the classic German armor, it's not going to resist the quarter penetration 406mm Nelson guns. Getting some decent damage there into the upper casemate. He's firing armor piercing. As you can see, he's overmatching my bow. Not really that angled. Mutsuki popping out. He's gonna get hard spotted. Definitely worth taking a shot. I have AP loaded still, but nothing I can do about that. Let us see if we can get a nice tight salvo at close range, switching to high explosive. Pausing to take my time to aim, but it looks like I miscalculated. He's staying bow into me, so I should stay at speed. He's turning to expose broadside now, so that's when I take my moment to violently turn in. I'm gonna start pre-turning my turrets. Remember, my turrets are quite sluggish. Slowing down to 3/4 speed, and I am able to dodge majority of the Mutsuki's torpedoes. That's both his triple tubes. You can see my secondaries are actually quite lethal, especially to a low tier destroyer like that. Have high explosive loaded sadly, so I am going to have to expend my not very impressive German high explosive into the Colorado. You can see there's still a bit of inconsistency with the shells, but we do land 3 out of 4. Just not bad. Honestly, I would say we're doing okay, but I haven't been impressed yet. I haven't had any cruisers to shoot at really. Mostly shooting battleships, and against battleships, these World War I era low penetration 350mm shells of the Prinz Eitel are not exactly that impressive. Bring my guns to bear again. The forward angles are pretty good, courtesy of having that Y turret extended quite far. I'm gonna aim for upper casemate first. We are under 10 kilometers, but I don't want to take any risks. Only 3 shells land, however. Angle in. You can see I can angle quite aggressively and still bring all my guns to bear. He's firing high explosive for some reason, so my German distributed armor scheme, combined with his rather poor HE penetration, or rather average HE penetration, does allow me to shatter that HE shell. Nelson at 9.9 kilometers. Gonna fire AP, this time aiming at waterline. Gonna see if I can score any citadels, and surprisingly enough we do. We only landed 3 out of 8 shells again though, so still not the best results. He's popping his super heal, but it's fine with me. That just gives me more time to prep another salvo. Unfortunately, he's turning out to dodge those torpedoes, so this is gonna have to be aimed into the superstructure. Since he's turning to look at me, I'm gonna start popping my heal. Remember last time he chunked me for 17,000 damage. just by casually looking at me because I was not quite angled enough. I'm gonna hide my 25mm bow. Planes coming in, I'm not AA spec, but my AA is still decent for tier 6 and this is an on-tier carrier. Unfortunately, the German 105mm still is only a 5.2 kilometer range AA gun. 2 ricochets there. He's still too angled for my armor piercing. Maybe we'll try the Ranger instead. In the distance, he'll still be a decent gunnery target. So you can see the shells leaving the gun barrels are actually quite fast, but then as they reach the apex of their climb, especially the high explosive of the Nelson, as they reach the apex of their climb, they slow quite dramatically. Slowly chipping away at these Ranger planes. Kind of close to this mountain here. Can I lead a little more this time? Can I dodge these torpedoes? He actually broke my steering gear, so I guess the answer is no. Double citadel onto the Ranger. And now we're going to be coming up onto the Nelson. Unfortunately, he is bowing, so I'm just going to look for the Ranger on my reload. Turrets turn quite sluggishly. Get spotted. He has the HE for me. No, wait to sector properly. Now I overmatch the Ranger all over, so I'm gonna pump shells into his rear. Nothing I can do about things here. I am gonna die here, but hopefully I can inflict some damage. Anticipating the turn of the Ranger, but I need to land shells into this section here. Hopefully I can blast him one more time before anything hits me. And that's the Ranger done. At this point, the Nelson is exposing far too much broadside, so I'm going to fire into his waterline. Unfortunately, I miss. My secondaries do set a fire, however. So he's pretty not angled against me. There's my high cal. Can I squeeze off some further shots before I die? He's a fairly raised citadel, and my rear guns actually have good angle on him. Unfortunately, they shatter into his torpedo bulge. Just don't have quite enough penetration, but compared to my previous memories of my experiences in the Prinz Eitel, it's actually a marked improvement. 130,000 damage, close quarters, gun-fed, high cal. Honestly, I'll take it. Mostly fired AP, which is fantastic. Don't want to be firing that German HE, as I said. It's not particularly good. Now this is the first of the German premiums with 2.0 Sigma that we're going to test out. But it's not bad, really. Honestly, it was a decent game for us. 17 planes shot down too. Kind of showing off the impressive tier 6 AA. 1900 base experience. Nothing too impressive, but I'll take it. A lot of my damage came from the Ranger. Decent amount of secondary damage, actually. You can see if we go into port, the Prinz Eitel does have quite a bit of substantial secondary broadside. Rocking the reward camo, of course. She has the casemates, which of course are the 150s. 7 per side, and then 4 of her 105mm dual-purpose secondaries per side. You can see here she has a distributed armor scheme. She is German after all, so 25mm bow. And then underneath the bow she has a bit of a pseudo icebreaker, 30mm, and then 120mm. Unfortunately they're completely submerged, so not that helpful. and then 270mm belt, and casemate armor of 150. Middle deck is 50, so she is somewhat HE resistant, but this lower section here, just outside the casemate, is 25, unfortunately. So she does catch HE damage, and then superstructure, which is quite high and easy to hit, 16. And then this rear deck is sadly, unlike the middle deck, the rear deck is sadly 25, and quite extensive, and then 25 on the stern. And again on the stern, there's that aft end armor belt strip, but it's too far submerged to protect her. If I strip this away, you'll note that there's no distinct German turtleback. Instead, there's just a very skinny turtleback, or skinny citadel overall on the inside of the ship at the waterline. So she can be citadeled, although it is still rather tough. Anyhow, that's the armor. Just gonna probably head back into Matchmaker. Hopefully we can get another game and continue to test the consistency, but the first game showed some promise. That first game did definitely show some promise, showed some market improvement over the old formula, which had, of course, the 2.0 sigma again, but with the German dispersion ellipse, which is a much wider and less consistent overall for scoring precision hits than the American dispersion that the Prinz Eitel has now. Now, of course, this change does not apply just to the Prinz Eitel. This was universally applied to all German battleships. I'm just using the Prinz Eitel to test because with American formula and 2.0 sigma, which is quite a bit better than most of the tech tree German battleships, which have 1.8, any difference in dispersion formula should be much more marked. Now this time we're on straight. It's a standard battle, sadly, but we are fortunate enough to be top tiers, so we'll be able to feel the full impact of the changes. This is, of course, the best kind of matchmaking for the Prinz Eitel when she's in that 5-6 matchmaker, where she can make the most of her caliber. Here, having low penetration power doesn't matter quite as much, just because she just overmatches through most of the external plating of all the cruisers in this matchmaking. Now, battleships she still won't be able to overmatch. Stuff in particular like the Mutsu or the Queen Elizabeth, for example, will outmatch you quite heavily in that regard, but those aren't the kinds of fights you should be taking anyway. Now, Prinz Eitel, the fourth of the Mackensen class battlecruisers, somewhat modernized as I was mentioning last game, but in general she still retains many of her battleship or battlecruiser characteristics. She's very fast for the tier, well above average in terms of speed for the tier, doing about 28 knots when at full tilt. Turning circle and rudder shift is, however, sluggish, thanks in no part to her large size. Her great length, of course, makes cutting through the water at high speed much easier, but it also makes turning the entirety of the ship quite a bit more difficult. So loading up into the standard battle, just gonna stalk from behind. You can see me coming up to that 28 knots, easily faster than my other two comrades here. The Warspite doing 23, the P.E.F doing about 25, 26 if I'm not mistaken. The P.E.F, however, is much more heavily armored and durable with his Russian damage control, and the Warspite just has big overmatching guns. Mutsu pops up, so this is going to be a bit of a problem flank for us. Mutsu is definitely not the easiest of matchups for the Prinz Eitel to handle. But Yoni appears on the horizon, 14 kilometers, so a nice range to test my dispersion. He's well angled, but I should be able to punch right through his nose with my 350mm guns, low penetration or not. Aim just ahead of him. Let's see if my shells can plunge through, and I do land 3 shells at range. Honestly, quite impressive. All things considered, if you've seen previous clips of the Prinz Eitel on previous patches, you'll know that this kind of consistent clustering doesn't happen that often, but we've only fired one salvo, so let's try it again. Taking some ranging fire from either the Texas or the Mutsu, however, it is high explosive shot. Bajoni turns out, allowing him to dodge the majority of my salvo, but he does catch a salvo from the rest of my cruisers. As a result, we're getting pretty close to that Mutsuki, but we have 10 seconds on our reload, so we are going to hold the salvo in case we need to finish off this Bajoni. He launches his torps, which my Pensacola seems to be fully intent on sailing into. Empty the barrels. Doesn't matter if we don't get the kill. We were going to switch ammunition anyhow for this Mutsuki in front of us. He has a Pensacola to deal with, but if he turns toward me, then he'll have German high explosive, which, while unimpressive, it still gets the job done. When push comes to shove, Mitsuki gets dispatched, which means I'm not going to need this HE anymore, so I'm going to empty it into this Texas. Switch back to armor piercing, and you can see that shell drag. The HE was pretty fast coming out of the barrels, but as it reaches range, it slows down quite a bit. 3 pens and a fire. Looks like he was taking torpedoes at the same time, so he more than likely damage controlled, so no fire tick for me. But as you can see here, that 4000 shell alpha is pretty bad. Now Mutsu's popping up. Mutsu, while having great big guns, is very thinly armored, so hopefully, if I aim properly at this 26 knot super dreadnought, I can get the shells to land where I want to. Unfortunately, it seems I don't quite have enough penetration power to hit the citadel, or maybe I just mis-aimed. Either way, 11,000 in penetrations. Not terrible, but not the devastating strike I was looking for. Again, the Prinz Eitel does retain her low penetrative power. Nothing in the game has changed about that. So I have an Omaha, a New Mexico, and a Huanghe to choose from. Huanghe is the least angled. Also closer by a little fair margin. Send shells through his nose, 6k in penetrations, not quite what I was looking for. Gonna adjust my angle, don't want to get pounded by the QE and New Mexico. Gonna make use of my aggressive forward angles. I don't believe there's any destroyer in the area, although the good part could technically stealth toward me. QE fairly angled. I guess that leaves a New Mexico who's moving at a rather low clip. Armor piercing coming out from what looks to be a Nuremberg. I shatter most of my shells on the angled New Mexico, unfortunately. So I'm gonna wait for my reload. Alba about to pop the corner. Judging angle based on minimap. Congo appears. Gonna adjust my angle again, ever so slightly. He's turning out, but remember, I'm at a tier where even 350mm guns overmatch his armor. Congo's reversing. Nuremberg AP, or Königsberg AP actually, sorry. Chunking my bow, gonna pop my heel, adjust my angle. He switches back to high explosive, gets a fire, and he's sitting almost still, and he has a fairly exposed citadel. Let's see if that improved dispersion can help me. Only overpens, unfortunately. Can the rear guns fire off? And we do score 1 citadel in retaliation. Again, this game showing off some nice, consistent dispersion. No complaints here about the overall performance of the actual shells in terms of where they're going. It's merely the Prinz Eitel's own rather mediocre penetration power which is causing us problems here. These 350mm shells do in fact have less penetrative power at most ranges than the 283mm or 11-inch shells of this Scharnhorst, which is the other 2.0 Sigma German battleship, which I would like to test. Now remember I was talking about that armor earlier. We're fairly close to this New Mexico, which has, on the other hand, rather high velocity 350mm or 14-inch shells. Unlike us, these are the World War II variant 14-inch shells, so he can punch us a lot harder than we can punch him. Königsberg reversing. I'm gonna shield myself by gliding back into cover. Pretty ugly salvo, but I still do get one overpen through the deck. Can I get two more through the deck? Yes, I can. Some nice, reliable dispersion. Playing the corner very cautiously, but we are, still beside a Huanghe, kind of, and close to battleships which have much more firepower than us. And I don't have that get-out-of-jail-free German Turtleback in this case. Two of my teammates drop, evening up the score again, so we're gonna have to pull a little more weight if we want to win this one. Can't quite shoot the New Mexico over this rock, so I'm gonna switch over to the Congo. Now the Congo is a tier 5, and what this means is that he has 19mm extremity armor. And this is good for us because it means I overmatch him even with my low penetrative power. My shell caliber is just simply quite large enough to just overmatch right through his 19mm bow armor, angling for the New Mexico, but he does still chunk us fairly decently. Huanghe smoking in front of us, so we do have to watch for the Huanghe's triple torpedoes. He has a triple per side. He also has next to no armor, so if I do this... Oh, miss with the rear gun. Only overpens on the rear gun. So I do dodge the triple set, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, did not kill that Huanghe when the opportunity presented itself. I missed my shot with the second forward turret. And instead of hydroacoustic, it looks like he's running reload booster. Now the Huanghe has access to either a hydroacoustic or a torpedo reload booster, but they do occupy the same slot, so you can have one but not the other. Alba YOLOing is problematic because if I don't one-shot him and he gets torps off, his 3 Japanese torpedoes are going to cause a large amount of damage to my hull. Probably lethal amounts of damage, to be quite frank. Huanghe that I crippled does drop to Pietra. Alba continuing to glide through that smoke, but there's going to be a moment when he leaves it if he continues forward, where I will have line of sight. So quickly squeeze off the pop shot at this range, even though I have fairly poor shell drag. It's kind of hard to miss. Lots of low HP targets in this funnel, and I'm holding their broadside. That New Mexico in particular is looking pretty tasty. Waiting for my reload, however. He's not looking at me. Now remember, I still have that problem of low penetration, so we're about to see if I can challenge New Mexico belt armor at this range. He's doing his slow 20 knots. Alba's torping me. Pretty ugly salvo considering American dispersion. None of my shells actually land into the belt, 2 of them in fact ricochet. Congo drops. Ooh, New Mexico shoots back at me, but thankfully he misaimed. Shells are too far back to get anything more than glancing over penetrations. He's accelerated somewhat. Can I get this kill steal? I'm gonna fire anyway, even though there's a terrain warning. Omaha kind of close to me now. Remember, I overmatch his bow. He's probably gonna turn in towards the Pietra, as I would imagine, if he's frightened of me. Although personally, I would say the Pietra is actually much more intimidating than me in spite of being a full tier higher. Nevertheless, he does choose to turn in and away from me. Can't shoot over this island, so I'm gonna have to wait for my ship to glide past. My bow is now exposed based on the fact that I'm spotted, so I know I can probably... Oh, I thought I could fire my front guns, but it was a bit early. Over penetrations on the first few. Omaha does have torpedoes, waiting for my back guns to become unmasked. Do have to stop turning. You can see the rate of turn of the ship is higher than the actual turn rate. I am going to eat the Omaha triples as a result, but they don't have that much actual alpha. At 12 kilometers, I probably cannot contest the belt armor of the Queen Elizabeth, so I should probably not even bother, but we'll try on the first salvo anyway. My anticipation, though, is that if any shells hit the belt, they'll actually just shatter. Again, another confed. Shell's behaving quite nicely. You can see that noticeable shell drag at range. You can lead a little bit more because of that. Queen Elizabeth quite slow. That one was a bit overled. Adjusting my aim once more. And the torpedoes finish off the target and clean up our second game. Yet another match. Yet another match where our shells are nice and consistent. A little less damage this time, but less time shooting at helpless carriers and more time shooting at actual people who shoot back. 114,000 damage, 57 shell hits, of which 3 are citadels, 1 incap, 2 ships destroyed, 1 fire, 6 secondary hits. And if you go to the team score wise, still climbing our way to the top, but I'm top tier, so that is where we deserve to be. Anyhow, this is just our initial assessment of the German dispersion changes using this platform because it's one that many people will have access to since she was in fact a reward ship last year. And because she's a fairly mediocre ship, and it's always fun to revisit ships after they get buffs and see if they've gotten better, and certainly I can say quite confidently that the Prinz Eitel does feel better. That'll be all for now. But before I go, let's just show you the captain build. I'm using my full tank captain. This is my GK captain. So priority target, into adrenaline rush, into superintendent, into fire prevention, into concealment expert, then back for expert marksman, and then basics of survivability. If you don't want to take basics, then you can take expert loader plus jack of all trades. However, on the German ships outside of the Scharnhorst, I prefer not to use HE. It's just so much more efficient to just shoot AP into the superstructure, and in a particularly accurate ship or relatively accurate ship like the Prinz Eitel with her American Dispersion and 2.0 Sigma, you can get a fairly reasonable amount of shells into superstructure if you have to. So that's the Prinz Eitel, kind of revisited a year later. Module-wise, very straightforward. Main armaments, tankiness, accuracy, and more tankiness. And revisiting her a year later, she's still not great, but she's certainly a bit better than she used to be. So, looking forward to testing out the Scharnhorst and the Grosser Kurfürst later on at a future date. But hopefully this was enlightening, and maybe it can help you remove your Prinz Eitel from her port queen status, given her improved accuracy. That'll be all, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!